think the first thing we need to remember when we're talking about license improvements is none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know the future, and no matter what agreements we reach today, they're going to be wrong in the future. So my advice is to try and prepare for the best, prepare for the worst, and hope for the best. But be prepared to change as you go along. The main things you're going to worry about over time are new technical improvements from your scientists, a better understanding of the marketplace as the actual product is put out there, so a royalty rate that makes sense at the beginning might be too expensive later on. You might end up with some new investors who try to push down the royalty rate before they put their money in. And this has happened to me on a few occasions where the new investors know that the difference between a company surviving and going bankrupt is their investment. And they look at us in the government sector, the public sector, to reduce our license fee because they know that we're not going to be happy if this company goes bankrupt. We also need to think about, as the company rolls out its product, which other areas it's going to be used and what support it might need. And suddenly we might find a research institute investing a lot more time and effort, ideally for more money, but we have to be ready to negotiate. And finally, we're going to answer a few questions about who improves the technology and the implications that that has. I believe that this is a common problem in our sector, mainly because our products tend to be released very early. In the academic research community, we're very early stage inventors, so by definition, the market tends to be unknown. It comes from a very active research base, so by definition, our scientists, who we have been paying to invent new science, are going to improve this product over time. And because the product is a long way from the market, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for these challenges to occur. And the company is going to need many investment stages along its way, resulting in plenty of opportunities for the investors to turn the books through. We have two solutions. Number one, keep calm and carry on. That is, pretend nothing has happened, put your head in the sand. Or number two, be a chameleon and change. In reality, we're going to do both. For small changes, keep calm, carry on, business as usual, cope with it. But when it's a big change, we have to renegotiate, change the license deal, and explain why it's in our interest and their interest to move forward. The big, most important point is you can only go between these 2 points by always communicating with the company who you've licensed the technology to and the investors who have the technology. And in my case, we've been doing it for so long that our investors are now very flexible to us. And they do flex when we ask them to, when we explain it's important. Because the price of this honesty is we tell them the good news and the bad news, but they have to help us when we ask for help. And as they've said to me in the past, the good news about you is the bad news comes before the receiver does. And they've worked with other technical providers where the bad news has been by the receiver closing down the company, telling them that everything was finished. Let's look at future developments by the licensor. The problem is that there will often be many new versions as the world moves forward. And the company that's got the technology wants to acquire these. But we don't want to be bound to give over these agreements without further negotiation when it warrants it. A particular difficulty in my academic world is you might start off with just 2 inventors for a particular product that gets given to industry. And over time, the research team grows, and you have many more PhD students, for example, working on it. And these new PhD students are not part of the original reward scheme. And they suddenly can feel very disappointed that their intelligence and inventiveness is not being rewarded. It's at these moments that when you renegotiate your license, there's some fresh money coming back to the university, and you can reward the latest inventors. It is in the company's interest to reward all the inventors, researchers and authors they want this creativity to continue. However, it's not always seen by the company to reward these investors, because they just see it as a simple financial transaction and are quite happy to save the money, especially in the early days when money is very tight. And I think this is where, as an academic, you have to educate these investors about the risks they run in the medium term. Quite often, we talk about the right of first refusal. What this means is that the company who has licensed your technology will be the first person who you go and talk to take a licensing other new technology improvements or other related fields. Ideally, you will say the right of first view, which turns the equation around slightly. If you do first refusal, they can spend a long time deciding to do nothing and lock down your technology. If you do first view, you give them the capability where they've got a few weeks to decide if they want to engage, and if not, you move on to other people. The other thing you have to do in these sorts of areas is really make sure that you tie down the area that they have the right to first view or refusal as tight as possible. Do not give away all your science base by a badly worded sentence. I think it's also a good time to bring in what we call the alternative dispute resolution, which is where you can put in your contract, if you disagree, you won't go to court, but you'll formally negotiate with an arbitrator, because it sets the tone from the start. Because in reality, if you're going to court, it's lost. So if you tell both parties at the beginning that the way we're going to solve any argument is by using a mediator, it makes life a lot better. What about developments by the licensee? You want to avoid any commitments that limit the options to develop new products, especially new products that you want to license to other companies or in different fields. We always have these options to acquire new IP, but make sure you're as clear as possible. It's easy to think this is well understood at the beginning, when both people are on very good talking terms. But as the relationship begins to get more difficult, this gets much harder. We often talk about grant backs, which is where an improvement is fed back to the other company. And what this grant back means that ends if one party does an improvement, the other party gets it. It can be bilateral or unilateral, and we'll go through a couple of examples. You need to be careful that it's not anti-competitive. And the EU has a simple rule that says if the improvement can be freestanding, they deem it anti-competitive if you pass it to the original licensee without looking for others. So, now a few simple worked examples. The technology is given to the company. Typically, in my case, we normally give 3 to 5 years of improvements before we start charging the company for these improvements, but not for new products. Of course, when it's a new product is always open to debate. Quite often, we add in that we want improvements back from the company, and we always claim that this is free for academic use. And we have to explain to the company that these improvements help to keep the science base fresh, because we can keep on getting PhD students working in this science area, generating new inventions to feed to them. What happens if you have more than one company with a technology? At the one end of the scale, it's not too bad. And Linux is a classic example, where you have hundreds or thousands of people contributing to the technology improvements, and it's all shared in the community. At that end of the scale, it's a very good consultancy market, and people will acquire the technology because they're quite happy that if one company gets into financial difficulty, there's a community there that can help them out. My example where it is more complicated was where we had nanofiber technology. And here we just have two companies. One was using it for medical uses, and the other one was using it for energy storage. And these two companies, while they did not work in the field, so they were not directly competitive, one of them was doing the early work on making the mass market products very cheap, and they were quite resentful that the other company was getting the improvements of the mass production without paying any license fees. They were quite happy for the university to get these benefits because they were used to that model, and it's a university. But when another company got those benefits, it caused some stress. And it was a difficult time keeping these two companies communicating, because if they didn't talk about the technology, we as the academics were losing out. Service and support. The Tech Transfer Office might give a free update to the company, but the problem you're going to face is if the inventor has already been motivated by giving him some stock, and he's being asked to give out free updates, how do you continue him to be creative? In his mind, he or she has already been paid for their inventiveness. It's quite clear if there's a defect or a fault, you expect the inventor to fix it. But creativity is more difficult. The other key thing you need to do is make sure you're not liable to losses, because the company is going to be using that product in areas you never thought of, and you could end up having faults or design difficulties you never saw. And the last thing you want is to be liable for these things that you could never cover up. I'm now going to go slightly different, and I'm going to explain how we use our intellectual property and our intellectual property license to structure our companies, to motivate our scientists to be involved in this opportunity. You're probably familiar with the phrase small medium enterprise, which is an EU definition of a small company. And small companies get special tax benefits. So whenever you're creating a new company, traditionally, we try to make it an SME, small medium enterprise, to give them these tax benefits. In the SME rules, the academic institute has to own less than 50%. Also, we quite like our scientists to be given the stock tax-free. Of course, these are UK tax rules, and I'm sure your tax rules are different, but they did drive our thinking. And just as an aside, whenever we create a new company, we arbitrary, and the key word is arbitrary, value the IP at £500,000. The reason being, nobody knows the right answer, but we have spoken to many investors all the time, and everybody says the IP at the beginning is worth between 250,000 and 750,000, and so we picked 500,000. We didn't want the difficulty on every deal having to negotiate the magic number, and now we say 500,000 and the investors agree. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but because we tend to go to the same investors for stage one, they're quite happy and they live with it. So what happens in reality? On day one, we give some stock to the scientists, to shares. Traditionally, well, according to our employment rules, the maximum we can give away is 30%, but this is just an STFC rule. Other institutes can be higher or lower. And as an aside, if it's a single inventor, we give 20%. If it's a team, 30%. 2 or 3 people, 25% between the group. Underneath UK law, because the stock has no value, the company has no IP, this is tax-free. We've given the inventors something worthless, so they're happy. On day X, and according to the law, it is a reasonable time afterwards. Traditionally, at STFC, we set 3 months. Other universities have been a bit quicker than us, and now the tax office has agreed that it can be 1 day later. We somehow find some investors. And the investors put money in the company, and the academic institute puts intellectual property. This generates no tax bill at the time of investment because the scientists still own their stock. It just became more valuable. And they pay tax when they sell their stock. So this is what the stock table looks like. The university has 49%. We have an SME. However, the problem is, what happens if the investor does not want to spend £300,000? And quite often this is the case. You're going to them with an early stage product to see if the market exists, to see if the technology works, and quite often they only want to pay 100, 150,000. Put it in perspective, £100,000 would get me 2 man-years at a research university to investigate the idea. If I'm paying for PhD students, it would be about 7 man-years, 7 PhDs, because we have a special grant. So £100,000 is plenty of money to test the technology. We can't take less than £300,000 because we lose our SME status. So what we do is we grant a non-exclusive license with an option to convert it to an exclusive license for stock to keep everybody happy. This is how it looks. So on one side, non-exclusive. We only get 120 shares now instead of 700. And at a later date, you acquire 840 shares for an exclusive license, and more importantly, a technology refresh. This motivates the scientists again, because they know at a date in the future, they're going to get more free shares. This is how the timeline looks. What I want to do now is talk about an IP toolkit that we use for IP licensing. Are there any questions on this subtopic before I move? Fantastic. Our academic partners have spent a lot of time doing license negotiations. And to speed things up, the UK Intellectual Property Office has come up with a standardised toolkit, which means it's easy to use these licenses. And I'm going to share them with you now. You can download them from the web for free and modify them for your locality. So, it's used to facilitate negotiations, to save you time and effort, and to provide best practice examples. There are 5 standard agreements. It's used by nearly every UK university, and as I say, it's available for free. It starts off with 3 assumptions. 2 I think are vital, and 1 is optional. First and foremost, you agree that you want to work together. Secondly, you agree you can decide what the project is about. If you cannot agree on those 2 things, you really should not be looking at this agreement. You should still be talking and answering the question. The third one, I think, is optional, and that is you pay full economic cost, because you might agree for a subsidised rate and transfer it to stock. But according to the Lambert, they say you should agree to pay full economic cost, but I disagree with them. The process is quite easy. You start off with 10 questions. And then you use these 10 questions to decide which of the 5 agreements you should be using. Does the sponsor, the industrial partner, want to pay for it? Is it critical to the sponsor? Is the university very dependent on the sponsor for materials or intellectual property? If you don't have these materials, does the project become difficult to complete? And is the facilities the sponsor giving you part of the background where you acknowledge it belongs to the sponsor? Has the sponsor taken the lead in designing the work plan? Are they managing the project? Are they setting all the milestones? I think an interesting one is, can you ring fence it? Can you make this project separate from all the other intellectual properties that the university does? Because if you can, the more of these questions you answer yes to, the more it looks like a self-contained commercial project. How important is this project to the future direction of the research group? Very important. You don't want to give away your IP. Not important. You will give away your IP. Number 10, is the sponsor paying full economic costs plus a profit, which is again a key sign that it's commercial work. So you go through, you do simple ticks on the website, and you get a score. And these are the answers. It's 0 to 4, it's either 1, 2, or 3, Lambert agreement. It's 6 or more, they say it's Lambert agreement 4 or 5. And I do like the fact they say it's 5, we don't know. But I think when you get to 5, you go back and flick a few questions over and convert them. A bit like when you do those love horoscopes, you don't like the answer. You go back and change a few of the answers to make sure you get the result you want. So if you get 5, revisit the quiz and tick the questions a bit differently. So we've decided we're going to section 2. We've got 6 or more yeses. We're going to get a different set of questions. Does the academic need to publish the results of the project? If the industrial partner is saying no, this is quite an important thing. So in the UK at least, there's a bit of status if your PhD has gone on commercial lockdown and it's removed from the university library and instead goes a note too commercial sensitive for public use. It's a sort of sign that you've done something very valuable as a PhD student. Does the university wish to count for the project as research income? Again, this suggests that it's a research project rather than rather than consultancy project. The profit question at number 4, and again number 5, can you use it as part of your PhD? If you get 0 of these, if every one of these is no, the rules are, go to Lambert 5. Lambert 5 means commercial research work, otherwise Lambert 4. What happens if we only have 0 to 4 questions? We're on section 3. And here you're trying to decide, is the project truly academic? Last set of questions were about, is it truly commercial? We're now looking at it the other way, is it truly academic? So you start off with, has the project been designed for academic interest only? Is the university leading the work plan or responding to the work plan? Is it part of where the research university wants to go? Is it part of their academic plan? Are you getting research council funding for this, so industry is only part funding the project? And this time, instead of are you dependent on the research, on the commercial companies' intellectual property, the question is, are you dependent on the university's intellectual property? We're halfway there. The last 5 questions. Can you do this without the company? The answer is yes, this is a research program. The answer is no, you're heading towards it being a commercial program. Will it take place purely at the university, or are you working at the commercial company's location? Are the staff on the project employed by the university, or are they employed by the company? Are you expecting a patent to come out of this, or commercial results? Who's actually interested in the project, as far as results are concerned? Is it novel science, capturing the academics, or is it good, pragmatic industrial results? And who's going to own it? Will the exclusive license provide a means to which the sponsor, i.e. the industrial partners, can exploit it? Are you expecting there to be different fields and markets and territories where the industrial partner isn't interested, allowing the university to exploit it in different areas? And again, is it that interesting to the principal investigator? And so on. And it guides at the end with a number of yeses and nos. Are we 3 or are we 2? I'm now going to look into the final part to talk what these different Lambert agreements come across are. Lambert 1, the university owns the IP and gives a non-exclusive license in a specified business area or field or a geographical territory. This is very good for the university, but industry can feel threatened. And when I've used this in the past, I've struggled sometimes to get investment, because the investors are very frightened that another company might be more successful elsewhere. Lambert 2, Lambert 1 with the option to go exclusive. This is quite liked by the investors and industry because they can lock down the technology later on, similar to as we did with the SME status. But the key thing is try to negotiate the exclusivity price before the project starts. Because if the project becomes valuable, you're going to start arguing about it. If it becomes worthless, industry isn't going to do anything about it. Lambert 3, this time we're going for assignment. So the university no longer has the IP but transfers it over to the industrial partner at a certain time with certain results. On number 4, the university just keeps the right for academic results. And that's the flaw of the academic purposes that I put in all my things. Industry really likes the corporate version of the agreement. I think it works for me, and it's one that we use quite often. And on number 5, this is really industrial research, and the difficulty here is getting PhD students involved. Because all the results are going to go to the industrial partner, and it tends not to be academically interesting. So in conclusion, the financial terms are always related to what is licensed. Make sure you go for a fair share of value, including your new products, your new versions, and your new patents. Make sure that both parties have a reason to complete the deal, and see it as a long-term relationship. And I suggest you use standard agreements as your starting point to make things easier. And to try and make sure that the tech transfer office keeps the scientists involved and motivated, and it's the tech transfer's job to explain to industry why they should help them keep scientists involved and not assume that scientists will be involved and motivated. Any questions? Thank you.
Right. To what extent do they make a distinction between background and foreground in these documents?
They're clearly specified. You have a clause to say background IP and foreground IP.
How much are they completely they're harmonized on the European Union approaches?
Yes.
So if you come with a Lambert agreement in relation to a collaboration with the German university, they will not.
They should be quite happy. We use we use our Lambert agreements for our academic partnerships as well, because the clauses are so.
Are they anchored related, because they have the interest groups on the European level, right? Where so and there are a number of these examples. Are they anchored in these sessions, or do you not?
I don't know if they are. Thank you.